You think I cheated? My sister slid the envelope across the table like she'd waited her whole life for this moment. She had no idea the bomb wasn't meant for me. My name is Josephine Larson. Everyone calls me Joe. I'm 36 years old. If you've ever been humiliated by your own blood and want to witness the truth, finally sit down at the table where it belongs. Hit like, subscribe, and comment "Witnessed" with your city below. I want to know who's with me before I take you back to how my sister ended up holding that envelope. Duluth isn't the kind of town people move to for the weather. It's a working harbor city on the edge of Lake Superior, built into a hillside so steep the streets run at angles that make your car complain in first gear all winter. My father, Curtis, spent 31 years loading iron ore onto lake freighters down at the docks. My mother, Adele, worked the counter at a diner on Superior Street from 1986 until her hips finally gave out in 2019. Everybody in this town knows everybody, which meant that eventually everyone would know exactly what happened in my parents' dining room on Easter Sunday. But in January of 2026, I still thought the story we were living was the one we'd chosen. I finished a night shift at St. Luke's ER at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. Drove 12 minutes home through a lake-effect fog so thick it swallowed the streetlights whole, and pulled into our driveway just as the gray Duluth dawn started leaking over Lake Superior. My husband, Marcus, was already up. He's a marine mechanic who services the ore boats, and when a ship's engine needs him at 6 a.m., the rest of the world simply waits its turn. I stepped into our mudroom, kicked off my boots, and heard him call from the kitchen. "Coffee's hot. Owen wants the blue thermos today." That was the whole conversation. Some mornings, that's more than enough. Owen is 6. He was born in January of 2020, right before the world changed, and he came into it with hair so pale and fine it looked almost silver under the delivery room lights. Marcus's family runs to dark hair and ruddy Norwegian cheekbones. Mine runs to my mother's side, sturdy, brown-haired stock going back generations of Iron Range families. Neither of us had any obvious reason to expect a blonde child, except for one. My great-grandfather, Halvor Larson, came off a boat from Bergen in 1921 and stayed blonde until he was 50. The gene skipped my grandfather, skipped my father, waited 3 generations, and landed, quietly and completely by chance, on my son. Owen's pediatrician mentioned it once, in his 2nd week of life. "Any blondes on either side?" I told her about Halvor. She nodded, wrote something in the chart, and moved on. That was the last time I thought about my son's hair color for 4 years. We spent Christmas Eve at my parents' house, 5 minutes from ours if you cut through the alley behind the church. My mother had made the same lutefisk and lefse spread she'd made every Christmas Eve since before I could remember. My father sat in his recliner watching whatever bowl game was on. My older sister, Karen, came in carrying a tote bag of wrapped gifts and a bottle of wine she'd bought at the Cub Foods on Central Entrance. She kissed our mother's cheek. She did not look at me. She looked at Owen. "Come here, sweetheart," she said, taking his little hand. "Let's get you looking nice for Grandma's picture." She led him upstairs to the guest bathroom, the one that used to be her childhood bedroom, and I stayed in the kitchen because my mother had asked me to whisk the eggs for the kringla dough. I did not follow her. I did not think to follow her. Karen had been fixing Owen's hair at every family gathering for 2 years by then. It was the one gesture she offered, and I had made the mistake of accepting it as kindness. She came back down 5 minutes later. Owen's hair was tied with a small red ribbon. She set his little brush down on the counter, wiped her hands on a dish towel like she'd finished a difficult job, and smiled at me for the first time all evening. "There, now he looks like Christmas." I said, "Thank you." That was the last kind sentence I ever said to my sister. 3 months later, strands of that hair would be sitting in a laboratory processing samples, and a manila envelope would already be printing somewhere none of us could see yet. I need you to understand what growing up in that house taught me. Because if you don't understand it, you'll think I was slow to notice what was building around me. I wasn't slow. I was trained. I was born in September of 1990, 21 months after Karen. From the day I came home from St. Mary's, my role in that family had already been assigned. She was the one who'd already been christened, photographed, celebrated. I was the surplus daughter, loved, certainly, but never the story. My father was on the docks 18 days out of every 30 in the years I remember best, working long hauls that kept him away for stretches at a time. When he was home, he came home to Karen, to her drawings taped on the fridge, to her weekend fishing trips out on the lake with our uncle, a family friend named Halvor Reyes who'd known my parents since before either of them married. Halvor had all the time in the world for Karen, and somehow very little for me. I asked once when I was 6 if I could come fishing too. My mother said, "You wouldn't like it, honey." Karen came home that afternoon with a base and a photograph, Halvor's arm slung around her shoulders, both of them grinning. I got a coloring book. That photograph still hangs in my parents' living room. There are 2 baptism photos framed on my mother's piano. Karen's from 1989, with Halvor standing behind her as sponsor. Mine from 1991. With a woman from church I'd met exactly twice, standing in that same spot. I asked my mother once when I was 10 why Halvor was Karen's godfather and not mine. She said, "Halvor's been through a lot, honey. He needs a break from all this." I was 10. 10-year-olds accept the stories the adults hand them because they don't yet have any others to compare them to. My father toasted Karen at her 30th birthday at a supper club overlooking the harbor in 2018. He raised his glass and said, "To my girl, the one who stayed." I was sitting 3 feet away, next to Marcus. My father did not include me in the toast. He did not correct himself. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table and said nothing. He knew what my father hadn't said. If you've ever been the second favorite child in a house that only had 2, comment second below. I want to see how many of us are out here. I did not become an angry woman. I became a watchful one. I became an emergency room nurse because a room full of people in crisis is easier to read than a family that's been quietly lying to itself for decades. Patients don't lie with their bodies. My family had been lying with theirs for 36 years, and I had never once stopped to truly look. Karen got engaged at 29 to a man named Jared. She called it off 6 months later. Engaged again at 34 to a paramedic named Colin. Called that one off 18 months later, too. My mother told everyone it was Karen's high standards. What I learned much later was something closer to the truth. Both men had eventually noticed something about her the rest of the family had never let themselves see clearly. She couldn't sit next to someone else's happiness without needing to redistribute it. My happiness became her project starting in the fall of 2023, 3 months after she called things off with Colin. Owen had just turned 3. Toddling around my parents' living room in denim overalls, and Karen watched him for a long moment before saying, in front of the whole family, "Marcus, you ever think Owen looks more like Joe's side, or someone else's side?" The room went still. My father kept eating. My mother stared hard at the pie she was cutting. Mark set his fork down, looked at my sister for a long, silent 8 seconds, then picked the fork back up and took another bite. That was his answer. And I thought at the time that it was the end of it. It was the beginning. Through 2024, Karen started calling Marcus directly, not me, him under the pretext of asking veterinary or mechanical questions that had nothing to do with anything. Every conversation eventually turned to Owen. Every conversation ended some version of, "Has he ever asked why he looks so different?" Marcus never mentioned those calls to me. He kept screenshots in a folder on his phone labeled simply CB. I found out about that folder in May of 2026. 50-some files, every message, every casual text, every comment she'd left under a photo of my son calling him our beautiful mystery in a family group chat. He wasn't building a case against her out of spite. He was building a witness, the way a man who spent his life around machines learns to notice a sound that doesn't belong before he understands what's actually failing. In February of 2026, Karen texted him directly. No group chat, no witnesses. "I'm going to say this once. If you want to know the truth about Owen, I can help you. Just say the word." Marcus didn't reply. I saw the notification pop up on the shared family iPad we kept on the kitchen counter. He didn't know I'd seen it. I didn't tell him I had. That night was the first night in years I didn't sleep straight through. My body knew something was coming before I'd let my mind catch all the way up to it. 3 weeks before Easter, I stopped by my mother's house on a whim, the way you do sometimes when something's tugging at you that you can't name yet. She was sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea gone cold in front of her. I sat across from her, made small talk about Owen's school, and then, careful and casual, I asked, "Mom, why did Uncle Halvor always favor Karen?" Even growing up, I never really understood it. My mother went quiet. Not for a second. For 6. I've watched people go quiet at bedsides in the last minutes of a life, and I've rarely seen anyone go quiet the way my mother went quiet at that table. Then she said something she had never once said to me in 36 years. "Some things don't have a reason, honey. Some things just are." My mother had a reason for everything. She had a reason for which drawer the good silverware went in. She had a reason for why the dish towels got folded in thirds and never halves. She had never in her life told me that something just was. I drove home. I told Marcus what she'd said. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his coffee, and then he said one sentence. "Joe, don't ask her again until Easter's over." He knew something. He didn't know what he knew, but he knew. We sat on the porch after Owen had gone to bed. Marcus was drinking coffee out of a walnut mug he'd turned himself on a lathe a couple of years back. One of the small, patient things he makes with his hands when the ore boats are between overhauls. He set the mug down, looked at me, and said the second full sentence he'd spoken about any of this in 3 years. "Whatever happens Sunday, I want you to trust that I saw it coming, and I want you to trust that our son is safe. That's it. That's all I'm going to say." I nodded. I didn't ask him what he'd seen coming. In our marriage, when Marcus says he saw something, I don't need to see it too. I just need to be ready to understand it once it arrives. To understand what came next, you have to go back to the winter of 1988. Halvor Reyes was 37 that January, married to a woman named Loretta since 1972. They had wanted children the way some people want to breed 3 pregnancies, 3 losses, the last one in December of 1987, which put Loretta in a rest facility in Duluth for 6 weeks afterward. Halvor came home alone every night that winter to a house he couldn't bear to sit inside. He drank for a while, then stopped because he was afraid of what he was becoming, and started driving instead the long, empty roads along the North Shore at midnight, past my parents' house, past the diner where my mother worked the counter until 10 most nights, prepping pies for the morning rush. My father was hauling long routes on the ore boats that winter, gone 3 weeks at a stretch. My mother had been married to him 5 years by then, had lost 2 pregnancies of her own, and was 27 years old and profoundly alone in a town where everyone knew her name, and, that particular winter, no one truly saw her. Halvor walked into that diner on the night of January 28th, 1988, at 10:52 in the evening. My mother wrote the entry in her order book, the one she used as a running work log. Everything else in that book is written in ballpoint pen. That one entry is written in pencil. It reads, "Closed early. Headache." I found that order book in a plastic bin in her garage in May of 2026, labeled simply Diner, 1985 to 1989, in her own handwriting. I stood there for 20 minutes with a single pencil entry in my hand, and I understood all at once what my mother had done and what she had spent the next 38 years trying very hard not to remember out loud. She locked the door. She poured him a cup of coffee. He talked about Loretta. She listened. I don't need to know what happened between 11 that night and 1 the next morning, and neither do you. What matters is what she did afterward. She washed the 2 coffee cups. She wiped down the counter. She turned off the lights. She drove home, got into a cold bed, cried once, and did not cry again for 38 years. My father came home from his run on February 3rd, 1988. He looked at her and said, "You look tired, honey. You feeling okay?" She told him she was fine. She had already made her decision by then that whatever had happened at that diner counter had not happened. And if a child came from it, that child would be my father's, because my father was the man she was married to, and he deserved the child she was going to give him. She wasn't lying to him. She was hoping. Karen was born on December 3rd, 1988. My father held her at the hospital with his eyes wet in a way I've never seen from him before or since. Halvor came to visit 2 days later with a bouquet of roses. Loretta, home from the rest facility by then, came with him. She couldn't have children of her own. She held Karen for 14 minutes. There's a photograph of that visit that sat on my grandmother's mantel for 30 years. Halvor standing behind Loretta's chair, one hand resting on it, watching his wife hold a baby that was his own. He isn't looking at Loretta's face in that photo. He's looking at the floor. I looked at that photograph 100 times growing up. I never once wondered why he stood like that. In April of 2026, I would finally understand. He was standing that way because he couldn't bring himself to sit down. Loretta died of cancer in 2010, believing her husband had been faithful to her for 38 years. Halvor died of a heart attack in April of 2019, a year after quietly submitting his DNA to a small regional genealogy project run out of a library in Two Harbors. He'd opted into relative matching. He probably didn't fully understand what he was leaving behind. Or maybe, somewhere, some men leave a door open at the end because they can't quite bring themselves to shut it forever. What Karen did next was a small, deliberate act by a woman who had no idea what she was actually picking up. She sat at her fourth-grade classroom desk one Wednesday afternoon in February of 2026, after the last student had gone home, opened her laptop and searched for a consumer DNA test that could check a sibling relationship without needing a sample from our mother. She found a service called Heritage Path Labs, a combined relationship and ancestry test, $149, 23-day turnaround, results delivered as a PDF, alleged relationship, aunt and nephew. She mailed in her own cheek swab along with a few strands of hair she'd cut from Owen's brush that Christmas Eve, and then she waited. While she waited, she came to Sunday dinner at our parents' house 3 weeks running. And every single Sunday she said something about Owen's hair, about how the truth always comes out eventually. My mother stopped replying to her. My father stopped chewing when she spoke. Marcus kept a small notebook in his workshop, dated entries noting every comment she made. His entry for March 22nd read simply, "Karen, the truth will come out one day." Said it 3 times over one meal. She thinks she's warning me. She's announcing herself. My sister was foreshadowing her own life, and she had no idea. She got the email on March 31st at 3:03 in the afternoon, parked in the faculty lot at her school. She opened the PDF right there in the dim front seat of her car and read the top-line summary. Genetic relationship consistent with half-aunt to nephew. Alleged aunt is not a full sibling of child's parent. Follow-up sibship testing recommended. She stopped reading at half. She read it the way a person who's already decided the story reads a sentence she read Joe cheated. Owen isn't fully Marcus's. She laughed out loud in that empty parking lot, printed all 4 pages the next morning at a copy shop on Central Entrance, and hid the envelope in her tote bag under a scarf and a paperback novel. Then she waited 5 days for Easter Sunday. Easter arrived unusually warm for early April on the North Shore, 60 degrees with a soft wind coming off the still cold lake. Marcus drove. I sat with a pan of Kringla balanced on my lap. Owen sang along to a movie soundtrack from his booster seat. At a 4-way stop by the Lutheran Church on London Road, Marcus reached across the console and put his hand over mine. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "we take our son home tonight, same as we came." I nodded. I couldn't speak. My hands already knew what my head hadn't fully decided yet. My mother had set the table for 8 herself. My father, Karen, Marcus, me, Owen, and my cousin Elin with her husband Grady, the only extended family my mother had felt strong enough to invite that year. My father said grace, the same grace he said every holiday of my life. "Lord, we thank you for this family, for the sacrifice of your son, and for the truth that sets us free. Amen." My sister opened her eyes before the rest of us did. I saw her do it. She was already looking at Marcus, already smiling. Halfway through the meal, she inserted a sentence into the conversation the way you slip a knife into a coat pocket. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she said, cutting a bite of ham, "about what actually makes people family." Marcus didn't look up. My mother reached for the water pitcher, her hand steady in a way that told me it wasn't. Not really. After the first course, my mother stood to clear the plates. I started to rise to help her, the way I've done for 36 years without ever needing to think about it. My sister stopped me. "Sit down, Joe. I've got something for Marcus." Better said with everyone here. My mother didn't put the plates down. She stood at the head of the table holding a stack of her good china in both hands, and she didn't move. She felt what was about to walk into that room before it arrived. Karen reached into her tote bag under her chair, pulled out the manila envelope, and slid it across the table toward Marcus with 2 fingers, the way a dealer slides a card. My chest went cold. My voice came out steadier than my chest felt. "You think I cheated, Karen?" She didn't look at me. She looked at Marcus. "Not think, Joe. I know. Owen's hair doesn't match you at all. You've been lying to him for 6 years. Today, everyone finally sees what kind of woman you really are." I didn't answer. There was nothing yet to answer. Marcus set his fork down slowly, the way he sets down a tool after a difficult job, and reached for the envelope. Before opening it, he looked at Karen and gave her one chance. Karen, before I open this, you just told a table full of family that my wife's been unfaithful for 6 years. Are you sure that's the story you want to be locked into?" She smiled. She'd been sure for 6 days. "Read it." Marcus opened the clasp and pulled out 4 stapled pages. He read the first one without moving a muscle in his face, then looked up. "Karen, this doesn't say what you think it says. Did you read page 4? Her smile hadn't dropped yet. She thought he was stalling. "It says exactly what it says." He read the relevant line aloud, in the same even voice he uses when he's explaining a difficult repair to a boat captain who doesn't want to hear it. Shared DNA between subject sample Karen Larson and secondary sample alleged nephew 12.5%. He looked up. "Karen, you teach 4th grade math. What does a full aunt share with a full nephew?" Her mouth opened. She'd prepared for every question except that one. "A full aunt and a full nephew share 25%, Marcus said. "This report is telling you that you and my wife are not full sisters. You share one parent, not both." My mother sat down slowly, still holding the plates, setting them onto the tablecloth so gently they made no sound at all. Karen's face hadn't fallen yet. She was still moving through the sentence in her head, still telling herself he'd read it wrong. She reached her hand across the table. "Give it to me." He didn't. He turned the page. Ancestry markers, he read. Subject sample: 62% Norwegian, 18% Sami, 14% English, 6% German. He slid the page toward my father. "Curtis, look at the German percentage on the daughter you've called the one who stayed for 37 years. 6%. Halvor Larsen was fully German, came off a boat from Bergen with all 4 grandparents from the same region. A full Larsen granddaughter would test in the high 40s for German, minimum." My father didn't pick up the page. He looked at it. He looked at my mother. He looked at the page again. He said one sentence. "Halvor Reyes was Norwegian and Sami, his mother's side." My mother's tears started then. She didn't sob. She didn't cover her face. She sat at the head of her own Easter table with a stack of plates in front of her and cried the way a woman cries when she's been ready for this exact day for 38 years. The kind of crying that makes no sound, because it's been rehearsed in silence for so long. My father, who once raised his voice at me for slamming a screen door in 2004, did not raise his voice at his wife of 43 years, who had just quietly confirmed a 38-year silence. He was too tired for that, I think. He'd been carrying the possibility longer than he'd let himself admit, even to himself. He said her name once. "Adele, was it Halvor?" She didn't look up. She nodded, once. Marcus turned to the final page and read it aloud, his voice steady. "Cross-reference indicates the subject's Sami and Norwegian markers are consistent with the Reyes line profile, submitted for genealogy comparison in 2018 by Halvor Reyes, now deceased. Confidence. Parental." The word parental landed on that table like a dropped plate that somehow didn't break it, just sat there, impossible to unsee. Karen understood then. Her whole face went slack. She reached across the table and yanked the paper from Marcus's hand, reading page 4 herself for the first time. Her hands shaking so hard I could hear the paper rattling in them. She looked at Marcus. "Please," she said, in a voice I'd never heard from her before. "Please don't say another word." He didn't need to. My father stood up, placed both hands flat on the table to steady himself. 67 years old, and visibly 5 years older than he'd been at the start of that dinner. Then he did something I hadn't seen him do in 20 years. He walked around the table, not toward my mother, not toward Karen. He walked to my chair. He put his hand on my shoulder. It was heavy. It shook, just slightly. "Joe, take your son home. Take your husband. I need to sit with my wife." For 36 years, I had been the second name in every sentence spoken in that house. In one sentence, at his own Easter table, my father made me the only name. He didn't soften it with anyone else's. He said my name, and he asked me to protect what he now finally understood had always been mine to protect. I stood up. I didn't look at my sister. I didn't look at my mother. My cousin Elin was crying silently at her end of the table, Grady's arm already around her. I walked into the family room, where Owen was building a tower of blocks with Elin's youngest. "Sweetheart, we're going home a little early. Grandma isn't feeling well." Owen looked up at me with the kind of eyes that go straight to the truth and hold it there without flinching. "Is Grandma sad, Mommy?" I told him yes. I told him Grandma was very sad. I didn't tell him why. He'll ask again in 10 years, and I'll tell him then. Or I won't. That's a choice I get to make slowly, on my own timeline. The way my mother apparently decided some things get to unfold only when the person asking is ready to actually hold them. Marcus was waiting at the front door with our empty Kringla pan. Karin was still sitting at the table, the 4 pages spread in front of her, reading page 4 a third time. She wasn't crying. She was simply, completely still. We walked out. The screen door closed behind us the way screen doors close in Minnesota in April, slowly, with a small squeak, then a quiet thump. Owen fell asleep against his booster in 4 minutes flat. Small children feel the tension in a room and dispose of it the only way they know how. I stared out at the still bare birch trees along the highway, the long gray light of a Minnesota evening in early spring. "You knew," I finally said. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. I knew something. Not what. He drove another half-mile before adding the second full sentence he'd ever say about it in that car. "I've known for 2 years that whatever was coming would come through her. I didn't know what shape it would take. I built a folder just in case. 52 files. It's on my desk in the workshop. You can read it tonight, or you can never read it. Either way, it's yours." We got home a little after 10. Marcus carried Owen up to bed, read him 3 books despite the late hour, because some rituals matter more on hard nights, not less. When he came back downstairs, he set a plain manila folder on the kitchen table in front of me. He kissed the top of my head, sat across from me, and waited. I opened it. I read for an hour every screenshot. The group chat post captioned "Our Beautiful Mystery." The February text offering him the truth, like a favor. His own handwritten notes tracking my mother's silence every time Karen brought up Owen's hair at the table. I closed the folder. I said one sentence. "You've been protecting me from a truth about my mother, while she was refusing to protect me from a lie about my son." He nodded. "I didn't know it was about your mother, Joe. I only knew she was the door." I put my hand over his. "Small towns don't need lawyers. They have grocery store checkout lines." Within a week, 4 women I barely knew had stopped me at the Super One on London Road just to ask if my mother was doing all right. I said she was fine. I didn't elaborate. Duluth understands the pause between a sentence and its meaning, and it rarely needs the meaning spelled out any further than that. Karen stopped attending church the following Sunday. My mother stopped the Sunday after that. My father went alone, sitting in the back pew for the first time in his life, nodding once at the pastor, not staying for coffee hour, driving straight home. He and my mother lived in the same house through those 2 weeks, slept in the same bed, drank coffee at the same table, and spoke maybe 8 sentences a day between them. He didn't leave her. He didn't rush to forgive her either. He was doing what a man from the Iron Range does when a 43-year marriage has been quietly sitting on top of one January night since before either of them fully understood what they were carrying. He was giving the truth a chair, letting it sit down, not yet making dinner conversation with it. Karen resigned from her teaching position 2 weeks later, citing a personal family matter. She packed a small trailer and drove 3 hours to Minneapolis, where a friend from college let her sleep on a couch. She didn't tell our parents where she was going. She didn't tell me. I found out through my cousin's husband, who works at the bank branch where she'd closed her account. She kept the key to Halvor's old cabin on the North Shore, 40 acres, appraised at just over $200,000. Money she could have easily had by selling it. She didn't sell it. She didn't visit it either. She kept the key on her ring the way a person keeps an old scar, because taking it off would mean admitting fully how she got it. I drove out to the cemetery in Two Harbors on the second Saturday after Easter and stood in front of Loretta Reyes's headstone for 20 minutes. She'd been gone since 2010. Someone had left daffodils in the small metal vase. I found out later it had been my father, quietly visiting once a month for 6 years, telling no one. I didn't say much. I said the only thing I had left to say. He didn't know. She didn't know. I'm sorry. 3 women's lives had been shaped around the same quiet lie. 2 of them were gone. 1 was my mother. I wasn't related to Loretta by blood, and I wasn't required to stand there and apologize on her behalf. But someone needed to, and no one else was going to. That, I've come to believe, is what standing in a family sometimes means. In the end, sometimes you stand in for the people who can no longer stand for themselves. 2 weeks later, my father told my mother he was driving to my house the next afternoon and that he didn't know when he'd be back. He told her it wasn't because he was leaving her. It was because he owed me a debt that had been overdue for a very long time. She nodded. She didn't argue. She'd used up her arguments in a diner in January of 1988. He pulled into my driveway at 3:15 the next afternoon and sat in his truck for 12 minutes before he got out. I watched him from the living room window. Owen was at school. Marcus was at the marina. It was just me, a pot of coffee, and my father sitting in a truck in my driveway, working up the nerve to walk toward a daughter he'd spent 36 years walking past. I didn't go out to him. He had to come to me. I owed myself that much. He came up the porch steps at 3:27. I opened the door, didn't hug him, gestured to the rocking chair Marcus had built for the porch a couple years back. He sat. I poured him a cup of coffee. He held it in both hands, looking at the birch tree in the front yard for a long 4 minutes before he finally said it. Joe, I owed you 36 years of knowing you were mine. I know that doesn't undo it. Let me start now. I didn't answer right away. I let the coffee go cold between us, the way I'd let almost everything go cold between us my whole life. Then I did something I'd never once done. I answered him honestly. You cannot make up 36 years, Dad. You can only stop them from being 37. He nodded once, drank the cold coffee anyway. He asked about my work, about Owen. He didn't ask me to forgive him. He didn't ask me to call my sister or my mother. He asked if he could come back next Monday. I said he could. He's come back every Monday since. He's teaching Owen to bait a hook on our back porch. My 6-year-old has never met Halvor Reyes, and my father is quietly teaching him to fish the way Halvor once taught the daughter my father spent 37 years believing was fully his own. There's a symmetry there I don't have the strength to fully name yet. I only have the strength to let it happen, one Monday at a time. My mother writes me a letter every 2 weeks now. She doesn't call. She doesn't visit. She writes on yellow legal paper in the same handwriting I've known my whole life. The letters are short 2 paragraphs, no more. She doesn't ask for forgiveness. She tells me plainly what she's done that week. Went to counseling on Thursday, baked bread on Friday, sat on the porch with your father Sunday. We didn't say much, but we sat. I read every letter. I haven't answered one yet. I will, when I can. I'm not in a hurry, and for the first time in my life, it feels like my own choice rather than a role someone else assigned me. Karen hasn't contacted me. She hasn't contacted our parents either. My cousin got a birthday card from her in May with no return address, the postmark too smudged to make out a city. The card read, in Karen's careful teacher's handwriting, I don't know how to be anyone yet. I'll find out. Don't tell them where I am. I told my cousin to keep the card and to keep the promise. My sister is going to have to build herself back from nothing. That isn't a mercy I can give her. It's one she'll have to give herself, in her own time, the same way our mother once had to. I found my mother's old order book in her garage in the second week of May, helping my father move a chest freezer. She'd left the garage light on and the plastic bin open on the workbench, like some part of her knew I would find it eventually. She never said a word about it to me. She just left it where I could see it, and I think that was the closest thing to a confession she had left in her. I sat on that garage floor for 20 minutes with a book of receipts in my lap and a single pencil entry under my thumb. Then I put the book back, closed the bin, turned off the light, and walked out. Some truths don't need to be spoken twice. Some truths only need to be seen once, by the right person, at the right time. Here's what I want you to take from all of this. My sister paid $149 trying to prove I wasn't who this family believed I was. She was right about the wrong person entirely. I spent 36 years quietly believing I owed this family an answer for simply being who I am. It turns out I owed them nothing at all. It turns out my father, when he finally understood, drove 5 minutes and sat in his truck for 12, working up the courage to finally say my name first. It turns out my husband had spent 2 quiet years building me a witness, so that if this moment ever arrived, I wouldn't have to be the only one standing there carrying it alone. And it turns out the only name worth keeping, in the end, is the one your husband, your son, and your father, standing on your porch on an ordinary Monday afternoon, already call you without a second thought. My name is Josephine Larson. I'm 36 years old, and I'm somebody's real daughter now, and I'm finally entirely done apologizing for not being someone else's. If you stayed with me this far, you didn't stay because of my sister. You stayed because somewhere in your own family there's a Karen, or a Curtis, or a mother who's been quietly carrying a January night in her chest for 38 years without ever setting it down. I don't have advice to give you about that. I only have witness, which is what I asked you for at the beginning, and what you're giving me right now in a car or a kitchen or a bed at 2 in the morning. Thank you for staying. Some truths only stop being lonely the moment someone else finally hears them.